Next, from Springfield, State Senator Jason Barickman holds a press conference to discuss his two bills to create an evidence-based school funding formula. This runs about 25 minutes.
So, good afternoon. We've spent, it seems like years now, talking about school funding reform, and there's lots of good reasons for that. I think we're all aware at this point of how broken the school funding system is. I'm not going to recite all of what's been said over the years about our broken school funding formula and system. We're aware of that. We're aware of the detrimental effects of things like proration to our school districts and our children. And I think as many people are aware, I've been an advocate of an evidence-based school funding model for a long time. In fact, I first introduced legislation that embraces the evidence-based model back in February of 2015. We couldn't even get a committee hearing on it back then. Fast forward to today, and I think we've seen a lot of meaningful progress on embracing the evidence-based funding model. In fact, there's a lot of people who are coalescing around this model, and I think that's a good sign, whether you see it from members of both political parties, members of both chambers, and I think we're starting to see positive signs come out of the governor's office. To me, these are all good signs. I want to point specifically to some of the work that is being done today in the Illinois House and is being led by Representative Will Davis. Will Davis has introduced legislation that embraces the evidence-based funding model, and I commend him for that effort. As some of you are aware, I served with Will when I was in the House. His district is quite different from mine. The area of the state for which he serves in is very different than mine. But Representative Davis has always shown himself to be an advocate of educational issues. I think that he has demonstrated in his involvement on the Governor's School Funding Commission that he has a significant understanding of the evidence-based model. And as a member of the Illinois House of Representatives, I think it's important that we're now seeing support for the evidence-based model, because I have always said, and I think others have always said, if we're going to change the law on this issue, it's going to take bipartisanship, it's going to take bicameral action, and it's going to take support from the governor of our state. So in all those regards, I'm pleased to see the work that Representative Davis has done. And his work is not yet complete. I think there are further things that we need to do on the evidence-based model, but I think he's got a good start. I spoke to him, in fact, just earlier today and talked about the work that he's doing. We talked about some of the differences of opinion that we may have on the legislation that moves forward. And so part of today and what I plan to do this week is to introduce legislation in the Senate in the form of amendments to Senate Bills 1124 and 1125 that will put in legislation my ideas on how we enact the evidence-based model. It's two amendments, and collectively those amendments both implement the evidence-based funding system and provide to school districts the tools they need to reduce their costs and give their districts flexibility. This legislation in the Senate brings us a lot closer to parity, which has been an issue that has been discussed at length. Parity, of course, is the notion that there's an equal or a level playing field for school districts. Oh, sorry. Touching the mic. So Senate Bill 1124, as amended, will be the introduction of the evidence-based funding model. The evidence-based model embraces the framework established by the Illinois School Funding Reform Commission for reforming the current school funding formula. I think people are beginning to become familiar with this model. It uses 27 elements to determine a unique adequacy target based on school district, demographics, and best practices, all is reflected in educational research and through consensus expert opinion. Adequacy targets are established which reflect the particular needs of children in each district and will lead to improved outcomes for students. This is a significant shift in education policy from the foundation level formula that we have today, which applies to all school students in all districts, and instead moves us towards a unique district adequacy target, again, based on the uniqueness of an individual school district. We then distribute money to those who need it the most, or those who, or better said, those who are the furthest from their individual adequacy target. We allocate additional resources as needed for children with disabilities, for children who are English learners, children who live in families that are considered low income, and children who live in areas of concentrated poverty. We incorporate means testing to drive more money to schools that are in districts with high taxes and low property wealth, or EAV. We utilize and embrace a hold harmless, or a base funding minimum, which means that school districts aren't going to lose money, and we establish then a per pupil hold harmless. So as enrollment is adjusted, so does the hold harmless. By doing so, we create a funding base and we protect districts as they move forward. This gives them an ability to plan and transition smoothly. It also recognizes the political realities of running legislation on school funding, which is people look at spreadsheets and they want to know how the districts in their legislative district play out. Thus, the hold harmless is an important component of this. Now, what's important here, again, is recognizing that Illinois has often been criticized as having one of the widest equity gaps in school funding in the entire nation. So, as money is added to the evidence-based model, we distribute it first to those districts who are furthest from adequacy. This is important in a historical context because if you look at just the last 3 years in Illinois, we have allocated or appropriated more than $1 billion to Illinois school districts, all done through the current funding system. We incorporate new spending transparency that should be understandable to the average person. This gives taxpayers a better understanding between the local contributions they make via property taxes as well as their district's ability to meet their own unique adequacy target. We create a professional review panel that will make recommendations to improve the formula and its implementation in 3 years. And then we embrace things that result from the Governor's Reform Commission, like ensuring equitable funding for charter schools. We repeal the Chicago Block Grant, which has a number of effects, including the elimination of proration of the mandated categoricals for every other school district in the state. This is a significant impact. We tie the legislation to pension parity, a request, as we know, of many legislators, Democrats, has been pension parity for CPS. By tying to Senate Bill 2172, which is the pension parity legislation, we create a situation where although CPS may lose money through the block grant, they in effect get it back through pension parity. We tie to Senate Bill 1125, that's the other one that I'm introducing here or amending here today, which incorporates mandate relief and management flexibility. This is mandate relief for all school districts. Again, it ties to the notion that we need to implement parity. Together, collectively, these bills provide real parity in terms of funding, pension costs, and management flexibility. The result is we're treating all schools the same, which has been a big driver of opinions throughout both parties, both chambers, in the legislature. Where we go from here, I think, is, the legislature, of course, is not convened this week or next, but when we return, I hope to have a committee hearing on this legislation. I think that the time is right for us to hear the evidence-based model in the Senate, and I'm prepared to present it in committee when we return. With that, I want to turn to all of you for questions.
Senator, we're halfway through the session, and you just kind of touched on it. Do you think that it is possible to get the formula changed by the end of this session?
I think it's possible. It's going to, again, it will take actions. It'll take bipartisan action, and it's going to take bicameral action. Look, the coming 6 weeks of the legislative cycle are notoriously when the most significant action is taken in the legislative process. So I'm hopeful that we can see this then and certainly enact it right away.
Senator, how does your proposal differ from Senator Menard's and Representative Davis's?
Well, I can't, Senator Menard has multiple iterations of a school funding bill this year, so I can't speak to. Right. Senate Bill 1, I believe, my last count had 3 amendments, each of which was maybe 400 or 500 pages long. So let me shift to, again, Will Davis, which I touched on in my opening comments. I think Will Davis's bill, which is House Bill 2808, I think your question is really a question of how do we differ from it, because that's my best, that's the answer I suppose I'm going to give here, is towards that. There's a number of key differences. I think how we handle the block grant is a significant component. The notion that we're removing the block grant but picking up the CPS pension cost, I think, is unique to how we approach that issue here. Representative Davis's bill has some components that drive up the cost of implementing the program. There's a difference in how I approach some of those. And then there's a whole bunch of technical but important issues that I think will likely be resolved, whether it be class sizes, how we utilize technology and weight those components. Representative Davis has his ideas, I've got mine. I think the important thing here is we're all communicating. When I spoke to Will this morning, he said that he anticipates some amendments to his legislation based on some of the feedback that he's had. He suggested that he'll look at what we're filing, but I think these give us some baselines to work from. Obviously, I think there will be a lot of attention on what's the differences, and I try to highlight those here. But my hope is that the two sides will resolve those differences, that we can come to the middle and come to an agreement on them.
Senator, so you're going to have hold harmless in the first year, and then in the second year you won't have hold harmless, right?
No. Go ahead. I'll clarify that.
So
But
if we do have hold harmless, and based on your 4-tier system, based on need, are you talking about additional monies that would be spent on education above the current levels, that those extra funds would be applied to the 4-tier system based on need?
So here's how I approach it. First, in year 1, now, there's a hold harmless that says we don't want to take away money from a school district and put legislators who are going to be asked to vote on this in the situation that has killed these ideas previously, which is looking at a spreadsheet with red lines on it. So we incorporate a hold harmless immediately. As we move forward, one of the things that I think we've all learned is that a hold harmless that is not adjusted for enrollment creates unintended consequences. So as we move forward and districts see gains or losses in enrollment, their hold harmless level would also then be adjusted.
Tied to student population instead of just total revenue.
That's right. We've had school districts throughout the state who have seen significant declines in enrollment. I think there's some of our suburban districts are seeing some very significant declines in enrollment. So it doesn't make sense to lock in a number as a hold harmless level and lock that into perpetuity. Instead, we said let's start with where we're at today, but then make adjustments for enrollment so that those districts aren't seeing windfalls of state dollars as they lose enrollment.
Now, how does categorical spending fit into all this?
So maybe clarify your question.
Well, you have per pupil spending, then you have categorical spending such as school bus transportation, which in rural areas,
Yes.
you have a low student population, but you're going to have high school bus costs.
So the
I don't know, on the whole harmless, are we talking just about per pupil funding, or do we look at the total cost operating school?
Yeah, the hold harmless really is a reflection of the funding formula. The categoricals which lie outside the formula, things like transportation and other categories, are treated in the same way with one exception, one significant exception. Today, school districts throughout the state apply for those mandated categorical dollars by making claims to the state. There's a process for which they work through. What we are saying is by removing the Chicago block grant, CPS will continue to make their claims, but instead of just getting money off the top, they're going to have to make claims just like every other school district. So we leave that alone outside the formula.
Do you foresee that creating a political speed bump as far as getting this passed with the Chicago?
Well, no, I mean, the two things that I've heard through all of our negotiations, conversations on this with the Governor's Commission and beyond are, number one, actually this predates the Governor's Commission. There has been a bipartisan desire to remove the Chicago block grant. That, I believe, was an outcome of the EFAC committee, and it's certainly been said by many members of the legislature on both sides of the aisle. Also said is the desire of legislators to not have scenarios where districts lose money through a change in the formula. That's why I approached it this way of saying with Chicago, who stands to lose money if you remove the block grant, but they stand to gain money when the state picks up their pension costs. So by tying them together, my hope is to address both concerns.
Do you know offhand, is that a net gain or a net loss for them?
Well, we haven't run the numbers. You know, the block grant adjusts itself every year. The amount of the overage of the block grant is a moving target, as is the pension pickup. So, but I think they're close. They're both in that $200 million range. But when you combine those along again with the hold harmless, the result is there's no losers, including CPS.
And on with 1125, I guess, mandates, do we know which mandates that would apply to?
Sure. The mandate relief is PE, driver's ed, third-party contracting. There's also some management rights and tools that currently are given to CPS that are then applied to every other district throughout the state.
Are those about collective bargaining, or what management rights and tools?
So the management rights and tools are things like, again, some are similar. CPS has available in law today a very specific provision that applies only to that school district. Rather than revise the guts of what it does, we've simply removed the provision that says this only applies to CPS, thereby applying it to any other school district. It involves decisions to contract with third parties, decisions to lay off or reduce and force employees, class sizes, staffing and assignments, decisions concerning use and staffing of experimental pilot programs, etc.
So with, you mentioned class size, do you foresee any unintended consequences of like, maybe a class goes up to like 35?
I think we already have class sizes that are 35. I mean, that's a product today of things that are decided both locally and a result of funding levels. So, you know, the goal here is to get funding to the districts which are most in need. That need, again, based on their adequacy target determined by looking at a district, you know, and its unique self and saying, what are the student population, what resources are available locally, what do we need as a district to provide our children an adequate educational opportunity, and then having the state fill that gap for those districts most in need first.
It also says you could give schools the ability to get rid of unfunded mandates via referendum. Are any unfunded mandates going to be off limits? You know, a lot of, like, we had the districts down here last week, and they said, you know, we don't want to get rid of unfunded mandates. A lot of them are, you know, really good goals to have, but.
Yeah, there's always going to be, I think, a separation between those things which are required by federal law, those things that might be health, life, and safety issues. But I think what we've continually seen from school districts is even once you set those types of mandates aside, there are numerous other mandates, some of which are new creatures of the legislature each year, that are imposing on them an obligation to do more even though we're not sending them more money. And so we're trying to give some flexibility on those. The referendum piece allows for more local control on those decisions. So it doesn't mean that a school district necessarily is going to do away with the mandates that we're releasing them from, but gives the school district a tool through local control to make decisions that are best for their school district.
Are you in communication with the governor's office on this? Do you think that they will endorse your plan or any of that?
So we've had a lot of conversations with specifically Beth Purvis, the governor himself. I think the governor, my perception is that he's moved a long way since he was sworn into office and has come to understand better the issue and the proposals that we're all working on here. I don't know what their opinion will be on this bill. They haven't seen it yet. But we're going to put it out there and receive feedback from all sorts of groups and people who are important to the legislative process. Obviously, getting support and a signature from the governor is a key component to passing a bill like this, but it's got to work its way through the legislative process, first.
Is there any, with the whole harmless and what you're trying to do, is there any estimated cost either globally, and I assume you don't have a district by district sheet that all the legislators will look at yet, but do you have either of those, either the local or, kind of, I think the NARS thing was going to cost $600 million a year, et cetera.
Yeah, I think there's two things here. Number one, when you start with the premise of we're just going to look at what we're doing today and call that a baseline, that doesn't cost any money, right? As we move forward, I think there's going to be some political decisions that are made. They're budgetary decisions. How much money are we going to put into a new formula, and what are the effects of that? I think those are all those are budget and political decisions that just will be made, through that process. This just gives us the tool to do it, and it starts from the standpoint of where we're at today.
Senator, where are educators at with this particular plan, or administrators or superintendents? I mean, did you consult with any of them about, hey, this is what I'm thinking about doing? What would you like? I mean, how did that work?
Yeah, I mean, there's an incredible history here, that dates back to 2015 when we were all talking about funding reform, and really the education community approached me then and said, we'd like you to look at this evidence-based model. I looked at it then. I really liked what I saw. I put that into legislative form back then. At that time, again, we couldn't even get a committee hearing on it back then. Here we are today, and I'm very pleased to see that there's really been a lot of coalescing around this evidence-based model, and I think that's very significant. The education community, I think if, as people interact with their school administrators and school board members over the last 2 years, there's been a lot of dialogue at a local level about the funding, system in our state, the criticisms of it, and a lot of attention, I think, at a local level has been pointed at the evidence-based model as being a solution to that. So, I can't speak for any of them, but I can say that it's their work that got me to where I'm at on this. I'm hopeful that they'll continue to show all the support that they've shown thus far, now that we're getting to this stage in the process.
What's the charter school funding?
So there was a number of outcomes of the governor's funding reform commission. The report, and I don't have it in front of me, but the report, for those who kind of went through it in detail, the report said that there were items and areas where there was consensus, and then there were kind of the areas where there wasn't consensus. One of the items for which the commission received consensus, there was no objections, was that the charter school funding lacked parity, that there ought to be equal funding for students in charter schools as there are for our public schools. There was a discussion of this at the commission. To paraphrase the collective thoughts that I heard was that it's unfair that unequal funding applies to charter schools, and so we've incorporated that we've incorporated that idea from the Funding Commission into the legislation here.
I know that Representative Davis and Menard want poverty concentration piece. Do you have that in?
We do. Yeah, there are components of this that both weigh or account for children who grow up in low-income families and also children who live in areas which have high concentrations of poverty.
I mean, poverty concentration in the district, like the tipping point for extra resources going to districts with a high poverty concentration, which I think is not yet in Tornado or the American State.
Right, so I'm saying we address those issues in this. Yes. This week. I mean, it's in a, yeah. I think because we're not in session, there's some logistics to how that happens, but we can get you copies of it right away. Yeah.
Can this formula change be done without a broader budget passed, and what are the chances of that happening?
Well, you know, yes, I mean, this can be done. You know, this is the mechanism for which money is distributed. The decisions of how much and when to distribute are obviously tangled up in that, you know, in the budget negotiations. I think it's important to have this tool in place first, so that we can get it in there, get it done right, so that when there's a budget, and specifically here a school budget, the mechanism is in place to push those funds through.